May 31, 1984, 10:47 p.m. Somewhere inside Virginia's most secure prison, 6 men on death row are about to pull off the most audacious escape in American history. This isn't a prison break movie. This isn't fiction. This actually happened. What you're about to witness is the only mass escape from American death row ever recorded. A real prison break that involved fake bombs, stolen uniforms, held hostages, and 2 serial killers who were supposed to die in prison. Instead, they walked right out the front gate. For 19 days, they'll evade the largest manhunt across the East Coast while America watches in terror. This is the story of the Briley Brothers and the $20 million escape-proof prison that couldn't hold them. If you love true crime that's stranger than fiction, hit subscribe right now. We document the wildest prison escapes, death row stories, and prison breaks the media doesn't want you to see. Let's go inside the most shocking escape in American prison history. Before they were death row inmates plotting escape, Linwood Briley and his younger brother James Briley were terrorizing Richmond, Virginia. Between 1979 and 1980, the 3 Briley brothers, Linwood, James, and Anthony, along with accomplice Duncan Meekins, went on a murder spree that shocked even seasoned detectives. Over a 7-month killing rampage, they murdered at least 12 people. Think about that. 12 innocent victims. They committed home invasions. They committed armed robberies. They committed rape. They committed arson. Their crimes weren't random acts of desperation. They were calculated, sadistic, brutal attacks on defenseless people. One victim was shot 5 times during a robbery that netted $30. Another victim was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered just for sport. The violence escalated with each crime. The Briley brothers seemed untouchable, always one step ahead of police, always vanishing into Richmond streets before detectives could close in. But in 1980, their reign of terror finally ended when they were arrested. Linwood Briley, the oldest, was convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to death. James Briley, his younger brother, was convicted of 7 murders and sentenced to death twice. Younger brother Anthony, less involved in the actual killings, received a life sentence. Their accomplice Duncan Meekins cut a deal, testified against the brothers, and received life imprisonment. But Linwood and James were going to die in prison. The question everyone asked was, would the state execute them before they found a way to escape? Mecklenburg Correctional Center opened in 1976 at a cost of $20 million. Governor Mills Godwin Jr. called it a monument to failure, a state-of-the-art maximum security facility designed to house Virginia's most dangerous inmates. It was supposed to be escape-proof. The facility had been built with death row housed in its own secure wing, separated from the general population. The prison had guard towers, motion sensors, electric fences, steel doors, reinforced walls, and a security system that was considered revolutionary for 1984. 300 of Virginia's most dangerous inmates were housed there. Among them, the Briley brothers, waiting for execution dates that never seemed to arrive due to endless appeals. The prison employed hundreds of correctional officers. Warden Gary Bass ran the facility with military precision. Everything was supposed to be locked down, controlled, monitored. No one had ever escaped from Mecklenburg since it opened 8 years before. No one was supposed to be able to escape. The facility was considered the most secure prison in Virginia, maybe in the entire Southeast. It was the perfect place to house death row inmates. Except the Briley brothers had other plans. And they had time to make those plans work. For months before May 31st, the Briley brothers observed. They watched how guards moved. They watched their routines. They learned when guards changed shifts, when certain officers went to certain areas, how the communication systems worked, which officers were more complacent than others. They were intelligent men, cunning men, men who had successfully evaded police for months during their killing spree. Prison was just a new kind of challenge. They studied the layout of death row. They learned where the control rooms were. They learned which doors could be forced. They learned how the radios worked. They made contacts with other inmates. Slowly, carefully, they assembled a team. 5 other death row inmates agreed to join the escape plan. Lem Tuggle, Earl Clanton, Derek Peterson, and Willie Jones. Each man had his own reasons. Some wanted to escape the death penalty. Some wanted to help the Brileys. Some just wanted any chance at freedom, however slim. But the Briley brothers' planning didn't go unnoticed. Other inmates got nervous. Some worried the escape attempt would fail and make life worse for everyone on death row. Some feared the Briley brothers would hurt them during the chaos. So they did what inmates usually don't do. They talked to the guards. They reported the escape plan. The prison moved quickly. In April 1984, Warden Base issued a prison-wide lockdown. No movement. No yard time. Nothing. The lockdown extended into May. It was supposed to prevent the Briley brothers from executing their plan. And it worked. The plan was put on hold. The brothers waited. But then something changed. Human rights activists began calling for the end of the lockdown. Prison bureaucrats worried about lawsuits. They complained about the conditions. The lockdown was affecting morale, so the warden lifted it. By the end of May, restrictions were eased. By May 31st, the Briley brothers were ready. And this time, no one saw it coming. Thursday night, May 31st, 1984, 10 p.m. Inside Mecklenburg's death row unit, 6 condemned men moved quietly. They had assembled makeshift weapons, shanks fashioned from metal, sharpened edges ready to cut. They had stolen guard uniforms. One of them had a crucial piece of equipment, a television set. This wasn't for entertainment. The television would become the most important prop in the most elaborate prison break ever attempted. Outside, the prison seemed normal. Guards patrolled. The facility was quiet. No one suspected anything unusual was about to happen. No one suspected that in less than an hour, death row inmates would overpower guards and walk straight out of the most secure prison in Virginia. At 10:15 p.m., the Briley brothers and their co-conspirators moved. They emerged from their cells in stolen guard uniforms. Other inmates in the unit who weren't part of the escape stayed in their cells and watched. The first confrontation happened when Officer Hawkins responded to an alarm in the death row unit. He climbed the stairs, not suspecting anything unusual. Then he saw it, an inmate in a guard's uniform. Hawkins knew immediately something was very wrong. He turned to run back down the stairs. That's when James Briley came up behind him. James held a shank, a homemade knife, to Hawkins's neck. "Try anything and I'll kill you," James said. Hawkins froze. He was being held hostage by a serial killer inside a maximum security prison. Officer Prince Thomas responded next, thinking there was a normal incident in the unit. When he got upstairs, he saw another inmate in a guard uniform. He ran back down the stairs. James Briley and Lem Tuggle came down behind him with shanks. They grabbed Thomas from behind. One shank went around his neck. Another went between his legs. Thomas was held hostage now too, as more guards rushed to the death row unit. Thinking they needed to respond to an emergency, they were ambushed, attacked, overpowered, held at knife point by death row inmates who were now wearing guard uniforms and controlling the unit. The Briley brothers' takeover was working perfectly. Once they controlled the death row unit and had guards held hostage, the Brileys put the next phase of their plan into motion. They had one of the guards, with a shank pressed to his throat, pick up the radio. The message had to sound authentic. It had to sound urgent. It had to convince guards outside the death row unit that there was a genuine emergency. One of the Briley brothers spoke quietly to the guard, telling him exactly what to say. The guard, terrified for his life, complied. He keyed the radio and transmitted the message. "We have a bomb in the death row unit. We need a van at the back entrance immediately. The bomb is active." We have to remove it from the facility before it detonates. The message went out over the radio to guards throughout Mecklenburg. A bomb threat. Inside a maximum security prison. Every available guard mobilized. A van was immediately brought to the back entrance of the death row unit. This was a crucial moment. Would the guards believe the message? Would they question it? Or would they follow protocol in response to a bomb threat? They chose to follow protocol. Meanwhile, inside the death row unit, the 6 inmates prepared the bomb. They wrapped a television set in a blanket. They placed it on a stretcher. They covered it with more materials to conceal what it actually was. Then, in a moment of psychological brilliance, they put on riot helmets to conceal their faces. They looked like prison security responding to the bomb threat. One inmate sprayed the stretcher with a fire extinguisher to further disguise the TV and make it look more like a genuine bomb being carefully handled. Then 6 death row inmates, 2 dressed in stolen guard uniforms and 4 in riot gear carrying a fake bomb, walked out of the death row unit toward the waiting van. At exactly 10:47 p.m., the van carrying 6 death row inmates and their fake bomb drove toward the front gate of Mecklenburg Correctional Center. The guards at the gate, responding to the bomb threat alert, had their instructions. Get this bomb out of the facility immediately. A bomb in a maximum security prison is the worst possible scenario. All protocol says to evacuate the device. Get it away from the facility. Protect the inmates and staff. The guards didn't stop the van. They didn't ask questions. They opened the gates. The van drove straight out. 6 death row inmates who were supposed to be executed in this prison simply drove away into the Virginia night. The escape took less than 30 minutes from the moment James Briley first pressed a shank to Officer Hawkins's neck to the moment the van cleared the prison gates. By 10:47 p.m., all 6 escapees were gone. Behind them, guards realized what had happened. The bomb was a television set. The guards in the death row unit reported that they'd been held hostage but were unharmed. The facility went into lockdown. The manhunt began. But the 6 condemned men had a head start. They had guard uniforms. They had a prison van. They had gone to prison for brutal crimes and had nothing to lose. For the next 19 days, these 6 men would evade law enforcement across 3 states while America watched in terror. We're 10 minutes into the most insane prison escape ever. If you're hooked, hit that like button right now. We break down real crime stories with action and details the mainstream media ignores. Let's keep going with what happened after they escaped. After escaping Mecklenburg, the 6 inmates drove the prison van toward North Carolina. They were supposed to stick together. They were supposed to have a unified plan. But things started falling apart almost immediately. The 6 men couldn't agree on their next move. Should they go north? South? Hide locally? Split up? The tension was building. The police were hunting them. Someone could be caught at any moment, and they didn't know if that person would talk. They stopped in the town of Warrenton, North Carolina. They abandoned the prison van in a schoolyard. Then they split up. The 6 condemned men became 4 groups, each heading in a different direction. Earl Clanton and Derek Peterson stayed together. They were desperate. They were hungry. They stopped at a laundromat in Warrenton, hoping for shelter and a chance to rest. But they were still wearing clothing with prison identifiers. One of them was wearing a correctional officer's jacket with the badges torn off. A patrol car driving past the laundromat spotted 2 men inside, one of them in that distinctive jacket. The officer called in. Within minutes, Clanton and Peterson were arrested. 2 escapees down, 4 remaining. But 2 of the most dangerous, Linwood and James Briley, were still free. By June 1st, every law enforcement agency along the East Coast was mobilized. The FBI got involved. Virginia State Police got involved. North Carolina State Police got involved. The escape was big news. 6 death row inmates loose, including the Briley Brothers, who had murdered a dozen people. Wanted posters went out. News helicopters searched. Roadblocks were set up. The FBI received hundreds of tips. Some credible, most not. People thought they saw the Brileys everywhere. In Vermont, in Quebec, in Pennsylvania, in Maryland. Residents in rural areas locked their doors at night. People were afraid. The Briley Brothers had escaped death row once. They had survived on the run before. How long would they last? Would they commit more crimes while free? Would they try to kill again? Lem Tuggle and Willie Jones, the other two escapees besides the Brileys, stole a pickup truck with a vanity license plate reading PI, one from a driveway. They drove north, heading toward Vermont, heading toward Canada. For the next week, they evaded police. But on June 7th, they were arrested in Vermont, just miles from the Canadian border. They had made it further than Clanton and Peterson, but were still captured. For escapees now in custody, two Briley brothers still free. The Briley brothers had a crucial advantage the other four didn't have. Family on the outside. Their uncle, Johnny Lee Council, lived in Philadelphia. From the moment they escaped, the FBI suspected they might try to reach Philadelphia. Agents knew the Brileys had family there. They knew from prison records what relatives existed. They put wiretaps on phone lines. They monitored traffic heading to Philadelphia. They waited. The Briley brothers made it to Philadelphia on June 1st, the same day they split from the other four. They went to their uncle's house. They stayed hidden. For 19 days, they lived as fugitives in Philadelphia, while the FBI closed in slowly. The brothers didn't hide in the house constantly. They went out. They got food. They tried to live normal lives while wanted for multiple murders. One crucial piece of evidence helped the FBI. A guard's uniform spotted on a tree near their uncle's house. It was a small detail, but it confirmed the FBI's suspicion that the Brileys were in the Philadelphia area. Then the FBI got another break. A call was traced to a Philadelphia garage. A wiretap phone had received a call from someone in Philadelphia. The FBI suspected the Brileys might be at that location. On June 19th, 19 days after the escape, federal agents descended on the garage. Nearly 20 heavily armed FBI agents and Philadelphia police officers converged on the location. At the Philadelphia garage, the Briley brothers weren't engaged in another crime. They weren't armed. They weren't attempting to fight. They were grilling chicken over a fire, trying to stay inconspicuous, trying to remain fugitives a little longer. When nearly 20 federal agents and police officers descended on them with guns drawn, the Briley brothers surrendered without resistance. 19 days of freedom had come to an end. For the first time since May 31st, the Briley brothers were back in custody. They were being taken back to Virginia. They were going back to death row. They were going back to face execution. When news broke that the Briley brothers had been captured, Virginia residents exhaled. The terror was over. The most dangerous escapees had been caught. The threat had passed. Governor Charles S. Robb issued a statement. "I am relieved that all of the escapees are back in custody without any injury or bloodshed. And I am grateful to the countless law enforcement professionals who have worked so tirelessly during the last 19 days." The public felt safe again. The prison felt humiliated. The warden felt the weight of what had happened. How had 6 death row inmates escaped from a most secure prison in Virginia? How had 2 serial killers actually made it outside the prison walls? How had the system failed so completely? The consequences were swift and severe. Warden Gary Bass was removed from his position as warden. He was transferred out of Mecklenburg. The director of the Department of Corrections was forced to resign. That's how significant the failure was deemed. Guards testified that they felt the prison was being run by the ACLU due to lawsuits and human rights concerns. They said morale had suffered. Procedures hadn't been followed. Security had been compromised. An official investigation was launched to determine exactly how such an escape could have happened from the most secure facility in Virginia. The investigation revealed uncomfortable truths. Guards had become complacent. Procedures weren't being enforced uniformly. Some security measures had been overlooked. The escape wasn't impossible. It was inevitable once the planning began and the lockdown ended. The escape resulted in major reforms at Mecklenburg. New training programs for guards. New security protocols. Better monitoring of inmate activities. Educational programs introduced for inmates. Work details assigned. In the years after 1984, the number of assaults on correctional officers dropped significantly. The prison learned from its failure. But for now, in June 1984, all anyone could think about was how 6 condemned men had walked out the front gate using nothing but stolen uniforms and a fake bomb. All 6 escapees were returned to prison. All 6 faced new charges related to the escape. Prison breaking is a serious felony. But more importantly, they had violated the trust placed in them. Earl Clanton, Derek Peterson, Lem Tuggle, Willie Jones. All 4 would eventually face execution for their crimes. Their escape had sealed their fates. They would die in Virginia prisons, either by electric chair or lethal injection. But the Briley brothers faced the most immediate execution dates. Linwood Briley's execution was scheduled for October 12, 1984. James Briley's execution was scheduled for April 18, 1985. The brothers had gained 19 days of freedom. They had seen the outside world again. They had experienced what it meant to run, to hide, to be hunted. And now they were going to die. Linwood Briley, 30 years old, was convicted of 6 murders. He had committed those murders in 1979 with his brothers. He had lived 12 years on death row. He had spent months planning the prison break. He had held guards hostage with a shank. He had orchestrated the fake bomb. He had made it 19 days as a fugitive. And now he was going to the electric chair. James Briley, 28 years old, was convicted of 7 murders. He had lived 12 years on death row. He had been the most active during the escape, pressing shanks to guards' necks, giving orders, executing the plan. He had made it 19 days as a fugitive. He had been captured in Philadelphia, and now he was going to the electric chair too. Linwood Briley spent his final months on death row at Virginia State Penitentiary in Richmond, in the same prison system that had held him before. He filed appeals. His lawyer argued that the escape plan itself should be grounds for appealing his death sentence. The argument went nowhere. The courts rejected every appeal. Linwood faced reality. He was going to die in the electric chair. Virginia's method of execution was electrocution using a machine called Old Sparky, the same electric chair that had executed hundreds of people in Virginia's history. Linwood had time to reflect on his life. He was born in 1954. He was now about to die at age 30. His entire life had been characterized by violence and crime. His childhood in Richmond shaped him. His teenage years showed early signs of violence. By his 20s, he was a serial killer. By 1979, he was responsible for at least 6 murders. He had lived more years on death row than he had lived in society as a free man. He had spent more time waiting to die than most people spend in their entire careers. Now the wait was ending. October 12th was coming, and there was nothing more he could do to stop it. 3 weeks before his scheduled execution on October 12th, Linwood Briley filed a final petition with the United States Supreme Court. He had one last chance to save his life. His attorneys argued that new evidence had come to light. They argued that certain procedures hadn't been followed correctly. They argued that anything, might convince the justices to grant a stay of execution or review the case. The Supreme Court considered the petition, and then they denied it. There was no justice available to Linwood Briley anymore. No court would hear him. No judge would grant a reprieve. No governor would issue clemency. The execution would proceed as scheduled. October 12, 1984, at Virginia State Penitentiary. Linwood Briley would be strapped into the electric chair and electrocuted to death for his crimes. As October 12th approached, Linwood faced his final days with a complicated mixture of resignation and defiance. Some reports suggest he maintained his innocence to the very end, claiming that the courts had gotten it wrong, that he had been framed or wrongly convicted. Other reports suggest he accepted his fate, understanding that the crimes he had committed deserved the ultimate punishment. Linwood had a son who survived him. He had a family that would grieve his death even after his life of violence. In his final hours, he may have reflected on the childhood he had, the family he came from, the choices that led him to death row, the escape attempt that had failed to save him. The guards prepared the electric chair. The execution was scheduled for 11 p.m. Witnesses were brought in. Linwood Briley was led to the execution chamber. He was strapped into Old Sparky. Electrodes were attached to his body. The switch was pulled. Electrical currents surged through his body. His muscles contracted violently. His head snapped back. The smell of burning flesh filled the execution chamber. In seconds, it was over. At 11 p.m. on October 12, 1984, Linwood Briley was pronounced dead. James Briley had longer to wait. His execution wasn't scheduled until April 18, 1985. That meant James had 6 months, from October 1984 to April 1985, to sit in his death row cell knowing his brother was dead and knowing his own execution date was coming. He had 6 months to watch time tick away. 6 months to process that his brother had died in the electric chair. 6 months to anticipate his own death. Some death row inmates report that the final 6 months are the hardest, knowing the exact date, knowing there's no more hope, having nothing to do but wait. James did what many inmates do in those final months. He wrote. He reflected. He prepared spiritually. 3 weeks before his execution on April 18th, James Briley married a woman in a prison ceremony. His father attended. It was a moment of human connection in a place of death, a moment where James Briley was treated as a person capable of love and commitment, not just as a condemned murderer. But the marriage didn't change his fate. It didn't buy him more time. It just gave April 18th, 1985. 1 year and 20 days after he escaped from Mecklenburg Correctional Center, James Briley was executed by electric chair at Virginia State Penitentiary. He had maintained his innocence. His final words, according to witnesses, included a declaration, "I am innocent, and that's it." He said he wanted to talk to the governor. He proclaimed that he was innocent of everything charged against him in Virginia. But his words changed nothing. The execution proceeded as scheduled. James was led to the electric chair. He was strapped in. Electrodes were attached. The switch was pulled. Electrical currents surged through his body. His execution was quick. Like his brother before him, James Briley died in the electric chair at Virginia State Penitentiary. He was 28 years old. He had lived 14 years on death row. He had experienced 19 days of freedom as a fugitive. He had married a woman during his final months. And now he was dead. What happened to the other 4? Lem Tuggle, who had been with the Briley Brothers during the escape and had held a shank to Officer Prince Thomas's neck, was executed by lethal injection in 1996. He had spent 12 more years on death row after the escape attempt before the state executed him. Earl Clanton and Derek Peterson, who had been captured in Warrenton just hours after the escape, faced capital charges related to their escape and their original crimes. Both were eventually executed. Willie Jones, another co-escapee, was eventually executed as well. All 4 men who had escaped with the Briley brothers went on to be executed for their crimes, Tuggle by lethal injection, the others by electric chair or lethal injection, depending on Virginia's changing execution methods. The escape didn't save any of them. It didn't buy them more than a few years of delayed execution. It resulted in new criminal charges. It resulted in increased security measures. It resulted in a manhunt that dominated East Coast news for 19 days. It resulted in major prison reforms. But it didn't result in any of the 6 escapees living. Every single man who escaped from Mecklenburg on May 31, 1984, was dead by 1996. The state had executed all 6 of them. The Mecklenburg prison escape of 1984 remains the only mass death row escape in American history. It has never been repeated. Not before, not after. The reason it hasn't been repeated is that the prison system learned from the failure. Mecklenburg implemented reforms. The Virginia Department of Corrections implemented system-wide changes. Other states studied the escape to understand what could go wrong in their own maximum security facilities. The escape happened because of a combination of factors. Intelligent inmates who studied the system, complacent guards who didn't follow procedures, a brief lifting of security lockdowns that had been preventing the escape, and a brilliant fake bomb trick that exploited the fear guards would naturally have about an actual bomb in the prison. The Briley Brothers succeeded because they understood psychology. They understood that a bomb threat would cause guards to follow procedure without questioning. They understood that guards in riot gear with a bomb would be waved through the gates. They understood that the fear of violence would override the normal caution guards would have. They exploited the system's own protocols against it. They didn't need guns or explosives. They just needed uniforms, a fake bomb, and the intelligence to understand how people would react under pressure. The Briley brothers murdered at least 12 people between 1979 and 1980. Those murders created 12 families of victims. 12 families who lost loved ones. 12 families who waited for justice. 12 families who came to court, who watched the trials, who heard evidence of unspeakable violence. The escape of the Briley brothers on May 31, 1984, brought back all that pain. Victims' families had to endure the terror of knowing that 2 serial killers they had thought were safely on death row were now loose on the streets. 19 days of fear. 19 days of terror. 19 days of wondering if the Briley brothers might come back. 19 days of praying for the manhunt to succeed. When the Briley brothers were recaptured and executed, it didn't bring the victims back. It didn't undo the murders. It didn't heal the family's pain. But it did provide closure of sorts. The men responsible for the deaths had faced the consequences. The men who had tried to escape the law had finally been held accountable. Justice had been slow. It took 12 years from crime to execution for Linwood and 14 years for James. But justice had ultimately come. 40 years later, the Mecklenburg prison escape remains the most audacious prison break in American death row history. No group has ever successfully escaped from American death row before or since. The escape lasted only 19 days. All 6 escapees were recaptured. All 6 were executed. But the escape changed how prisons operate. It led to reforms. It led to better training. It led to better security protocols. It demonstrated that even facility called escape-proof can be breached by intelligent, determined inmates who understand the system better than the guards do. The Briley brothers' names are synonymous with the escape, but they were just 2 men among 6. Lem Tuggle was just as involved. Earl Clanton and Derek Peterson were there. Willie Jones was part of it. All 6 men are now dead. All 6 faced consequences. But they remain historical figures in prison history, the men who pulled off the only mass death row escape in American history. That's the story of the Mecklenburg 6, the only death row escape that actually worked, even if only for 19 days. If you made it this far, subscribe for more true crime stories that shocked America. Drop a comment. Do you think the escape was brilliant planning or just prison failure? Did the guards deserve to lose their jobs for that security failure? Check out our other prison break videos. the Angola 4, the Alcatraz escape, and the Texas prison escape that left guards dead. Thanks for watching.